Hello and welcome to Lesson 3 on Disaster Risk Communication Approaches. My name is Eliza Schmidt, and I am the DRR Capacity Development Coordinator at ADPC Academy. I will be going through this lesson with you. Please feel free to pause the video as we go along to take notes. This will really help you with the quiz at the end of the lesson. I want to start this presentation with a quick overview of what this lesson is about. First of all, this lesson only has one objective: to define risk communication approaches for rapid and slow onset disasters and disease outbreaks such as COVID-19. Because effective communication is essential to ensure that people are able to prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters, many approaches have been established to enhance its effectiveness and ensure that the needs of target groups, especially at-risk groups, are met. This lesson will present you with 6 disaster risk communication approaches that can help you prepare the disaster risk communication plan that you will present in Lesson 8. We will look at ADPC's systematic planning approach, the dialogue approach, the message-centered approach, risk communication for early warning systems, the crisis communication approach, and finally, the risk communication and community engagement strategy. More information on each of these approaches can be found in the reference tab of this lesson. Before we begin going through the different approaches in detail, there are a few important things that you should keep in mind. First of all, there are many risk communication approaches, and this lesson does not present all of them. Rather, it introduces you to 6 of the most well-known and used approaches that are relevant to natural hazards and the current COVID-19 pandemic. Secondly, when developing a disaster risk communication plan, you don't need to choose only one approach. You can also combine multiple approaches together if you think that this will help you achieve your objectives. Finally, you should only choose or design your risk communication approach once the stage of the risk management process, the type of risk situation, and the target audience have been identified. This will help ensure that your approach is appropriate and is more likely to lead to effective risk communication and behavior change. If you have multiple target audiences, you might even have to have a separate approach per audience. Now, let's look at some of the risk communication approaches. So the first one we will be looking at is ADPC's systematic planning approach to disaster risk communication. This approach is built on the idea that risk communication should be based on the systematic planning of information sharing, social perceptions, and scientific research to prevent, solve, or mitigate risks with customized risk messages for specific target groups. It consists of 7 steps. The first step is policy formulation. Here, the focus is on developing a risk policy and communication strategy where you lay out your plans and discuss the role of risk communication. If you have insufficient data to do this, it is highly recommended that you conduct additional research and discuss with social groups and communities. The second step is designing the risk communication plan. This is where you decide which risk communication methods, sources, and channels you will use, and think about what effects you expect them to have. Research is critical here, and it is recommended that you conduct a participatory disaster risk assessment to identify your target groups, their characteristics, such as their behavior towards disaster risk, popular local communication channels, and influential individuals or institutions who influence people's opinions and actions. The third step is pre-testing. This stage is crucial to understand whether the design and content of your messages and communication materials are appropriate and effective. Here, you will conduct small workshops with representatives of your target group to analyze whether they have perceived the design and content of your communication materials in appropriate ways, or if they think you need to make some changes. The fourth step is implementation of program. After the design and content of your communication materials have been modified based on the outcomes of the workshops with your target group, you can start implementing your risk communication plan. Some of the activities that are usually done at this stage are, for example, distribution of brochures and leaflets, organization of risk communication events such as conferences and rallies, and discussion forums, among many others. The fifth step is evaluation and impact assessment of program. Here, you will review your disaster risk communication initiative against its established objectives. The assessment should highlight the worth of the communication activity to the community. The evaluation and impact assessment can be conducted in 4 steps. The first step is about ensuring that the impact assessment is included in the project design. This can be done through nominating an assessment team from the start and specifying the requirements of the assessment early on. The second step consists of developing a detailed assessment strategy. The third step is conducting the assessment, and the final step is reporting the results to stakeholders. Some basic questions that you can ask when conducting your evaluation and impact assessment are: did we achieve our objectives? If no, why? Did we achieve anything beyond our objectives? Were there any negative impacts from our initiative? You can find more details on this approach, including how to conduct the evaluation and impact assessment, in ADPC's Field Practitioner's Handbook. The link is provided in both the Suggested Readings and References tabs. Now, let's look at the dialogue approach. This approach focuses on genuine communication between communities and specialists. Genuine communication means that outsiders or specialists adapt their way of analyzing and transmitting information based on what community members prefer. For example, outsiders may prefer the written word and precise calculations to transmit information, but community members may be more receptive to visualization and talk. Another characteristic of the dialogue approach is that it involves discussion, debate, and sometimes arguments between various stakeholders. Finally, this approach allows target groups to explain their perspective and needs, especially on how specific risks can be addressed. This will enhance the effectiveness and sustainability of your disaster risk communication. It will also increase the likelihood of risk information leading to action taken. More information on this approach can be found in Chapter 10 of John Twiggs' book on disaster risk reduction. The link to this book can be found in the References tab of this lesson. Another approach is the message-centered approach, which is based on the work of Perelman and Albrecht-Titeka in 1969. In this approach, risk communication consists of an interactive process where all parties are given access to multiple messages representing all worldviews. This approach is thought to enhance understanding of risk communication in 2 ways. 1, those taking opposing sides in risk situations engage in argument until they come to a common conclusion about which action to take to reduce risk. 2, observers collect and contemplate information from multiple sources, some credible, some highly biased, and discuss the information with family, friends, and neighbors. This leads to a variety of opinions, which ultimately increases understanding of risk and accounts for the complexity of the risk communication process. More information on this approach can be found in the article entitled Introducing a Message-Centered Approach to Risk Communication. The link to this article can be found in the reference tab of this lesson. Now, let's look at risk communication and early warning systems. Risk communication is a vital component of disaster risk reduction, especially in the design of early warning systems. Early warning systems are designed to prevent hazards from turning into disasters. However, early warning systems can only protect people if warnings are received in a timely manner, the meaning of the warning is understood, and the right actions are taken. Risk communication is therefore an essential component in early warning systems. One of the proposed approaches for risk communication in early warning systems focuses on 7 key elements. The first element is about understanding people. To help ensure that risk communication is effective, it is first important to understand what people think, feel, and do about risk, including what makes it easy or difficult for them to take certain actions. Understanding people's demographics, values, beliefs, media consumption patterns, and who they trust is equally critical. This will enable you to choose more appropriate risk communication tools and processes that are more likely to make people consider their options and take action. The second element concerns technology. An early warning system needs to be accompanied by technology. Designing an early warning system consists of multiple steps. First, you need to identify the actions end users should take. Then, you need to identify various segments of the target population and analyze how they differ in terms of their ability to receive warnings and how this may affect their ability to comprehend and act on an early warning. The third step focuses on identifying the channels that you will use to transmit early warning messages to your target audiences, considering what technologies you need. The last step is defining which sources will be most trusted when sharing information. The third element of this approach is all about collective risk thinking. This means that we not only look at individual risk, but also at collective risk. This is because the behaviors and actions of one individual can affect the level of risk a community faces. For example, even though young people are less likely to die or have a severe case of COVID-19, they can still spread the disease within a community and expose vulnerable groups. The fourth element concerns community engagement. Risk communication is not always about convincing people to act in a specific way. It should also focus on avoiding placing undue blame and burden on vulnerable groups in relation to taking action, especially when the actions that should be taken are unclear and when structural factors are putting them in harm's way. Open and public conversations about complicated decisions, uncertainty, trade-offs, and responsibilities are critical here. The fifth element is about media engagement. The media can usually communicate about risk at scale. Technical experts, media professionals, and governments should therefore work together to provide open and transparent risk information. This will significantly enhance risk communication by enabling productive public dialogue based on accurate and reliable information. Trust building is the sixth element. The public must trust the sources of information if they are to act on warnings and follow guidance. If agencies have a problem with trust, it is important for them to partner with trusted intermediaries such as local leaders. Finally, The seventh element is about tackling disinformation and misinformation. This can be achieved through having public interest media with viable business models, better internet governance, education systems that foster media literacy and skills in critical thinking, as well as influencers who condemn sharing dis and misinformation. More information on this approach can be found in the article entitled, "Should I Stay or Should I Go? Why Risk Communication is the Critical Component in Disaster Risk Reduction." The link is included in the reference tab of this lesson. Let's now look at the crisis communication approach. This approach is very straightforward and only has one purpose: to trigger appropriate behavior in emergencies. In this case, the organization that manages risk knows what is best for the audience. It only gives them the information they need to deal with the emergency situation, such as evacuate to a safe place. Finally, we have reached the last approach of this lesson, the Risk Communication and Engagement Strategy, or RCCE for short. This approach is people-centered and community-led, and consists of processes and approaches to consult, engage, and communicate with people and communities at risk, or whose practices or behavior affect risk. It was used by WHO during the Ebola outbreak and is used by numerous organizations such as WHO, UNICEF, and IFRC during the COVID-19 pandemic. This approach is based on 10 principles. According to these principles, RCCE should be open and transparent about knowns and unknowns, uncertainty and mistakes, nationally led by governments supported by civil society and communities, community-centered, working with their knowledge, capacities, and vulnerabilities, accountable to the affected communities, informed by data about community needs, issues, and perceptions, participatory, enabling community-led responses, nurturing trust as the critical component of response, integrated as a foundational approach for the entire response, inclusive of all vulnerable and marginalized groups, and coordinated to avoid duplication and gaps and increase impact. In addition to the 10 principles we just went through, RCCE also has 4 strategic objectives. The first objective is to be community-led. This means that communities should assess their needs and participate in the analysis, planning, design, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation of local responses to a specific risk. The second objective is to be data-driven. Evidence about the community's context, capacities, perceptions, and behaviors should be collected, analyzed, and used. Evidence should be disaggregated by sex, age, and other potential drivers of exclusion or vulnerability, such as disability or ethnicity. The third strategic objective is to reinforce capacity and local solutions. This can be achieved through mentoring, technical support, and resource sharing with local actors and government agencies at all levels. Local expertise also needs to be recognized and placed at the center of RCCE efforts. The fourth objective is to be collaborative. Partnerships should be built between communities, community-based organizations, local governments, NGOs, the private sector, and local governments to enhance the quality of RCCE efforts. You can find more details on the RCCE strategy in the reference tab of this lesson. Before we finish, it is important to remember that regardless of the approach you choose for your disaster risk communication plan, risk communication must be gender responsive and inclusive. Minorities, migrants, refugees, persons with disabilities, the elderly, and women often experience the highest degree of socioeconomic marginalization, increasing their vulnerability to disasters. For example, they might have less access to early warning systems or health services. Understanding these issues can enable you to support the capacity of vulnerable groups before, during, and after disasters by giving them priority assistance and engaging them in decision-making processes for response, recovery, preparedness, and risk reduction. Risk communication should be creative, sensitive to culture and context, and gender-targeted based on the knowledge of how specific groups of women and men create, receive, interpret, and exchange information on hazards and disasters. This will help ensure the effectiveness of your risk communication and that the needs of vulnerable or at-risk groups are met and that no one is left behind in the process. Some examples of gender-responsive and inclusive approaches are included in the next slide. Here are some of the examples of gender-responsive and inclusive approaches. For children, you can consult them about their concerns, fears, and needs, and consider different needs based on gender, context, and marginalized communities. For women and girls, you can take into account provisions for childcare, transport, and safety for any in-person community engagement activities, and provide specific advice for people, usually women, who care for children, the elderly, and other vulnerable groups. For refugees and migrants, you can support the translation and dissemination of risk information into preferred languages and partner with refugee and migrant community networks. For the elderly, you can tailor messages and make them actionable for particular living conditions. For more guidance on how to ensure that your approaches are gender responsive and inclusive, I have included a few resources in the Suggested Readings tab of this lesson. Before we finish, let's go through some of the key messages of this lesson. As was mentioned at the start, there are many approaches to risk communication, and this lesson only presented a few of them. There are many resources available online, so I encourage you to have a look at other risk communication approaches. You might find one that is more suitable for your disaster risk communication plan than the ones presented here. You can also combine multiple approaches together and create your own risk communication approach if this will help increase the effectiveness of your plan. Finally, choosing the best approach for your risk communication depends on the stage of the risk management process, the type of risk situation, and the target audience. Therefore, wait until you have all the necessary information before choosing your approach. And remember, all approaches to risk communication must be gender responsive and inclusive to be effective. Thank you very much for joining me in this lesson. I will see you in Lesson 4 on understanding your audience.